Great. Good morning, everyone. We'll begin in a second. As people are coming onto the Zoom, I'll just want to mention to everyone that we will be using a application called Menti to collect answers to some questions and to moderate Q's and A's at the end of the session. To link on to Menti, either go to menti.com, the URL is in the slide, or use the QR code and enter in the code at the top, 2397002. That will give you access to the Menti environment, which we'll be using in today's presentation. I will just also note that all information that's being collected from Menti is completely anonymous. We don't know who is responding, so just so that you're aware. We do collect all the information and keep the responses as part of the budget consultations. So we'll give a minute or two more and just to let people come in, and then we'll begin.
Okay, let's get started, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's budget town hall consultation. This is the third one this week. Consultation is a very important part of the budget planning process, and we are committed to working with the community to establish TMU's priorities for the next fiscal year. Our Board of Governors requires the university to develop an annual budget that does not result in a deficit, and the university has presented balanced budget every year for the last decade. This fiscally responsible and transparent approach ensures that we are able to remain forward-looking and not to accumulate financial issues over time. In addition to that, and since 2017, TMU has undertaken periodic credit rating reviews. The university currently has an AA3 credit rating, which indicates high quality grade, and that we are subject to a low credit risk. To ensure continued good standing, we must plan prudently and ensure that we are not leaving future groups of students and employees to deal with financial issues down the road. This year, we once again find ourselves in a constrained growth environment. The provincial government continues to restrict our domestic enrollment levels. In addition, we are entering our fourth year of a tuition fee framework that decreased fees by 10% below 2018-2019 levels and has kept them frozen ever since. This cut and freeze has had a real impact on our operating revenue. We continue to work with our fellow universities and sector partners, like the Council of Ontario Universities, to connect with government and illustrate the negative impact of these tuition policies on the fiscal health of our post-secondary institutions. Despite these risks and challenges, we'll continue to be forward-looking and support institutional priorities within a balanced budget framework. There are exciting developments underway for our institution. We have just announced recently a site for our new medical school in Brampton. This June, our first cohort of law students will convocate. Our students recently voted to support a new wellness center on campus that will be under construction in the new year. And as the first university in North America to undertake a full-scale name change due to community feedback. TMU received unanimous support and royal assent for our name change this past December. All of these achievements underscore the fact that TMU is fulfilling its vision of tackling real-world problems, forging strong partnerships, and fostering innovative solutions to help shape a sustainable and prosperous future. With that, I will turn the mic over to our interim provost and VP Academic, Roberta Iniciato Provenzano, to speak about our guiding principles in the budget process and future planning. And I look forward to questions and comments at the end of the presentation. Over to you, Roberta.
Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you everyone for taking the time this morning to participate in our budget town hall. I see we have quite a few people this morning, so that's wonderful, especially because your feedback and input are crucial steps in our budget planning. The operating budget is the financial plan for how the university will receive and spend funds in a fiscal year. It represents our allocation of resources, includes an estimate of revenues and expenditures, and allows for the prioritization of resources to be allocated in a way that achieves the goals and objectives of the university. The budget also provides accountability to our stakeholders. Can we go to the next slide? So when we are preparing the annual budget, we adhere to basically 5 guiding principles. The first one being prioritizing our students. We also aim to protect Toronto Metropolitan University's core business of teaching, research, and service, which really form the mission of our university. We endeavor to be fair and transparent. We remain forward-looking, and we conduct wide consultations with the community as we are doing today. These principles are paramount for how we plan for the future. Can we go to the next slide? Looking into 2023 and 2024, our priorities are essentially to align with TMU's strategic vision and related plans. We must ensure an exceptional student experience that includes a focus on academic success, but also well-being and financial assistance. We are in the process of developing the university's digital strategy to take advantage of innovations developed during the pandemic. And that would include exploring enhanced EE activities to build relevant workforce skills, to leverage pedagogical technologies that enable fully online, hybrid, blended learning that really support student success and access. And lastly, we'd like to implement a strategic enrollment management framework that enables TMU's academic priorities, that promotes students' academic success by improving access, and provides support to students along their life cycle at the university from application to graduation. Next slide, please. So there are 5 complementary plans that play a role in our budget planning. The first being our academic plan, our strategic research plan, our international strategy plan, our campus master plan, and the university's advancement plan. Uniting these plans is TMU's strategic vision 2020-2030. This overarching framework serves as our roadmap, moving TMU toward the same vision and goals. Promoting access to high-quality post-secondary education is an important institutional value, and as expressed in our 2020-2025 academic plan, we remain committed to funding activities that allow us to be bold in our thinking, in our actions, and in our decision making. Do you want to go to the next slide, please? So we will be using Menti here today to collect your responses in real time. There's a code at the top. I think Glenn mentioned it. If you log into www.menti.com, all responses are completely anonymous. So to interact with this particular slide, we wanted people to answer, what initiatives or activities do you think TMU should prioritize? So this will become a word cloud. Some of you may be familiar with that if you use it in your teaching. So it'll change and grow as more responses are received. And if multiple people put in the same word, that word, as you may know, will get bigger on the screen. So here we go. Okay. As more people add their words, we can already begin to see what's on the mind of our participants, which is very similar to what is also on my mind, for example, as interim provost. And I think I can also speak for my colleagues, President Lashimi and my colleague Glenn Craney. So transparency, of course, transparency in everything that we do, including the budget process. That's why we hold these town halls. That's why we hold individual, group or individual consultations over the next few weeks. Employee well-being, absolutely. In my former role as VPFA, this was and continues to be really, really close to me. Mental health and campus safety related to employee well-being, but also to our student community. So we can look at those. As we look out into the word cloud, I can see student support, absolutely, teaching, absolutely, part of our core mission. We wouldn't be here if we wouldn't be teaching students. Sorry, it's moving now. Research, absolutely important to our core mission as well. So these words, these ideas, these concepts, these important things for you are also important for us. I'd like to thank you for interacting, and I'm sure we'll have questions at the end of the presentation related to some of these topics. I'll turn it over to Glenn Craney, our Chief Strategy Officer, who will walk us through the rest of the presentation. Thank you very much, and over to you, Glenn.
Great, thank you, Roberta. So the next series of slides, we're going to be looking at some budget mechanics. These are some key elements of the budget framework that we want people to know as they're providing feedback to us. So if we go to the next slide, I want to start the story by talking about where we receive revenues and where we spend revenues as an institution. On the left-hand side of the slide, you see where we get our revenues from. And the piece that I'd like you to walk away from understanding is that 90% of all of our revenues come from either operating grants from the province or tuition fees from students as we move our way through. What this really means is that enrollment drives the vast majority of our revenue. And as I often say through these presentations, enrollment health is financial health for institutions. It's important to note that the grants slide shows 37% of our revenue coming from operating grants. This has been shrinking over time as the total number of operating grants from the province has remained fixed for the last several years. And tuition fees have continued to grow as our total student population has grown over time. On the right-hand side of the slide is our expenditures. And again, it's important to note that 75% of everything that we spend is on salaries and benefits. We are a people organization. And so for every dollar that comes in to the university, that's usually 75 cents is spent on hiring a person. Student financial aid is a large proportion of our revenue at 6%, and non-salary operating, or so basically purchases that we hire, are about 20% of the total. If we go to the next slide. I want to provide a little bit of context. And so as you noted that grants and fees represent 90% of our revenue. We are a publicly assisted institution, and the vast majority of that revenue is regulated by the province. So we do pay attention to the provincial budget. Well, we have not seen the provincial budget for 2023. That'll likely happen at the end of March or early April. We can look at clues from the 2022 provincial budget and the 2022 fall economic statement. For the last several years, the Ontario budget has been focused on infrastructure and managing inflation. While we have not seen large investments in post-secondary education, we have not seen cuts either, which is a good thing overall. We do pay attention to the financial state of the province as well, and we note that currently the province is spending more money than it's taking in. So we monitor that over time as an indication of what will happen in terms of our budget for moving forward, and what the province will do in terms of regulating either tuition fees or providing more operating grants. If we go to the next slide. One new thing that we just want to mention, and this is put in as something that we're monitoring. For those who have been watching the papers, they'll note that there was some financial difficulties at one of our sister institutions in the province. And as a result of that, the provincial auditor did 2 value for money audits across the province, and that's resulted in a new financial accountability framework with the government of Ontario. This was announced just recently that it'll begin in April 2023, and as a result of that, there's going to be a number of financial indicators that the government will be collecting, with actions required any of the indicators fall below a threshold. So this is a new portion for us. We're continuing to monitor this as it comes into place, and we'll be reporting back on this as we move through the budget process overall. We go to the next slide. As I said before, enrollment health is financial health. So I just want to spend a little bit of time about our enrollment plan, starting with domestic enrollments. And so it's important to note here that the total number of domestic enrollments that we have at the province is fixed through our strategic mandate agreement. So this is an agreement that we have spanning a 5-year period from 2020 to 2025 that sort of fixes the total number of domestic students that they're willing to pay for. Now, we did see a fairly significant spike at the beginning of the pandemic, and we were actually 8% above our funded level of students in 2020. And so we have a planned decrease to get back to the overall funded level from the province overall. What we've done is we've set an intake target for domestic students that if we hold that intake target for 4 years, will bring us back into our funded levels of enrollment, and we're looking to implement that for next year. Now, we have seen a small decrease in applications for fall 2023, but we still remain competitive with about 6.5 to 7 applications for every space that we have at the institution. So we do feel that confident that we'll make our domestic intake targets, and then we'll remain at that funded level from the province. If we go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about international enrollments. As we look to expand international enrollments, our overall target is 15% as a proportion of our total undergraduate population. I just want to note that the international intake remains volatile, with the effects of COVID still reverberating through travel around the world. Many source countries, many countries that send students to Toronto have COVID restrictions still in place, or rapidly changing COVID restrictions. And I'll also note that the federal government has very, very slow visa processing times, with up to 9 months from some particular countries around the world, which means that if we offered a student admission today, they would not have a student visa in place necessarily for September. And so this remains challenging as students have choice around the world about where they can go, and other countries are processing visas much more quickly than we have. Our plan is still to expand our international fall intake as much as possible in the current environment. And we've also introduced a new pilot winter intake that's going to help to increase the international population as well. If we go to the next slide, just want to show you some comparative figures around how we stand in terms of the proportion of international students. This shows the share of international students, undergraduate international students by university for 21-22. This is the last date of available data for everyone. You'll note here that the system average currently is about 20%. So that means 1 in 5 undergraduate students in the in Ontario are international, and there's a distribution across universities. You'll note us in the gold bar at the bottom third. This, of course, is not an accident. This was our enrollment plan. We focused on expanding international enrollments until 2017, 2018, we're focused on expanding domestic enrollments until 2017, 2018, when the government put in place the fixed level of funding that we currently have. And then the choice was to then start to increase international students at that time. 2 years ago, we were sitting at just over 5% of our student population being international, and it's grown to 10. And as I said, our target is to grow to 15. If we go to our next slide, I will show you what the enrollment plan looks like. The blue bar that's underneath is the total number of domestic students. You will note here that you'll see that increase in 2020 through the pandemic, and you see us gradually falling off. It becomes horizontal in 22-23, which is that funded level of students that the province provides. And the gold bar that's at the top, you're looking at total number of international students, and you see that rising till we hit 15% in 2025 overall. So if you go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about tuition fees, and Mohammed mentioned this off the top. In terms of history, we've seen our tuition fee framework frozen for the last 3 years from the province, and that's following a 10% decrease that we had in 2019-20. There's no indication that the fee freeze will change for next year. Well, we don't know because the province hasn't announced what tuition fees are going to be. We have assumed for the purposes of setting the budget that the tuition fee freeze will remain in place. I will note that we do use tuition fee increases to offset inflation at the university, and I'll show you some inflationary projections in a few moments. But the lack of ability to increase tuition fees creates a challenge in terms of paying for our ongoing costs. Two other things to note: that international fees remain unregulated, so we can set international tuition fees at a level that we choose. Our goal for international tuition fees historically, and will continue to be somewhere mid-market. We look at the average tuition fee, international tuition fees in the province, and pick somewhere in the middle, and that's currently where we stand. And that beginning 2 years ago, we were permitted to increase fees for out-of-province domestic students alongside that policy, and we've been doing that as well. We go to the next slide. Just want to note that this continues to be an uncertain environment for budget planning, and so we start the budget cycle with imperfect information as we're putting the budget together. And just to outline a couple of the things that we're looking to learn as we move through the process and as things become known as we move forward to an April approval. Again, the tuition fee framework is not yet announced. We're assuming a tuition fee freeze, but we should see that somewhere around the provincial budget. International recruitment is again a little uncertain because of visa restrictions and travel issues. Inflationary pressures continue to be a concern for everyone, especially with the levels of inflation these days. Salary and benefit escalations are a concern, and in particular, I just want to flag one new thing for this year, and this is the province's Bill 124, which was a public sector wage legislation. This legislation created a moderation period that put caps on the total increases in wages over a period of time, and this was struck down by the Ontario Superior Court in December. Well, the province is still appealing the bill, and that's expected to happen. The appeal is expected to be heard sometime in the summer. They did not look for a stay of the ruling, which means that Bill 124 is not currently in effect. This is a new event over our budget process, and we're working through what the implications on the budget are going to be. But obviously, if the moderation process is no longer in place, this is going to put upward pressure on salaries overall. If we go to the next slide. I just want to talk about the types of budgets that we're looking at here, and I will show you a preliminary budget before we finish this section of the presentation. But often we're asked why we're looking at the operating budget. If you go to the financial services website for TMU, you'll find a lot of information, financial information for the university, including our audited financial statements, the approved budgets every year, and you'll find a couple of different types of budgets there. Often we get questions between the consolidated budget, which is larger, and the operating budget. And I just wanted to be able to explain the difference between the two. We focus on the operating budget because that's the portion of the overall budget that is within our discretion. The institution receives revenues that are in many times restricted, and so those can't be part of our operating budget. A good example of that is research grants overall, and so if a professor went out and received a SHRC grant to do a particular research project, that is money that is coming into the budget, will be shown on the consolidated budget, but that money has to be spent only on that faculty member's research, and it can't be used for other purposes. And so just wanted to make folks aware of that in terms of looking at how those two pieces fit together. The types of expenditures that are in the operating budget includes things like academic departmental budgets, student financial assistance, and infrastructure maintenance overall. And currently the operating budget stands at $663.4 million for TMU. If we go to the next slide. Just want to show you some numbers around the operating budget and the consolidated budget. So if you look at the table on the left, you'll note that the total consolidated budget for TMU was $968 million. And what I wanted to demonstrate here are the restricted areas of revenue that comes into the institution that are non-discretionary. So things like research, trust and endowment funds, and also funding for student related activities. So these are student fees that are paid that are restricted for student activities. And so if you start with the $968 million and you remove all the restricted funds, you come down to the $663.4 million budget. Now, doing a little bit of budget math, I do want to introduce one new concept, which is the cuttable base. Not all line items in the operating budget are cut by the university. A good example of something that is not cuttable is student financial assistance, which is $30.7 million. So when times are tight and we're looking for budget reductions, just to be clear that we're not looking to reduce student financial assistance. Much the same way we still have to heat and light our buildings, so that's not part of the cuttable base. So when we talk about the overall base that's available for any types of reductions, that turns out to be $481.9 million overall. So if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to show you a couple of the budget assumptions for the current model as we're developing it. And starting with revenues, we're projecting a small or modest increase in revenues up to 0.4% of the overall total. We're assuming no operating grant growth, and so we're assuming no decrease either. We're assuming an in-province domestic tuition fee freeze to continue, and modest increases in international tuition fee revenue brought about by a international tuition fee increase, plus a small increase in the total number of students. At the same time, we're looking at cost escalations increasing by about 3%. These are combined by, again, salary and benefit increases in teaching costs, international recruitment costs, and inflationary on non-salary costs as well. And so when you put this through the budget model overall, what this means is that we're currently projecting a shortfall of $16.9 million. This is a story where our revenues are not growing at a rate that covers off our costs. A 3% increase in salary in cost is not unreasonable in the post-secondary environment. This is really a revenue challenge, meeting our overall cost pressures. As a result of the shortfall, there's a requirement from the board to balance our budgets. So we're requesting that all budget managers create plans to reduce base expenditures by 3.5%. The budget letters went out earlier this week. Those plans will be submitted to the budget committee of the university for review and looking for implementation moving into the next budget cycle. If you go to the next slide. Want to show this all together in terms of a schedule. At the top, you see our projected operating grants, our projected revenues, operating grants remaining firm at $260.2 million. Tuition fee revenue having a small increase as well. And so we're projecting overall revenue to grow from the 663.4 to the $666.2 million overall. And you can see projected expenditures with departmental budgets increasing from 535 to 551. When you bring this all together, of course, total projected expenses will be $683.1 million, which is the $16.9 million deficit. So if you go to the next slide. In terms of budget planning, I just wanted to recognize that a 3.5% budget cut is significant, and there's been a number of budget reductions over the course of the last 5 years. This is a challenge for the community as a whole, as we remain true to the values and principles that Roberta said in the beginning of the presentation. And it's important that we all work together to ensure that we have financial health at the institution while maintaining our core principles. If we go to the next slide. Our second Mentimeter question, with that as background around all the bits, all the pieces and how they come together for the budget. We're looking for suggestions that you have for this year's budget. These are suggestions that have to balance things that we would need to prioritize for moving forward. These will come up not as a word cloud, but individual boxes. And so I encourage you to put all of your ideas on the slide. We are collecting all of this information. This will be part of the decision-making process as a whole. So we see our first cutting non-academic salaries. I will note that when we're looking at an increase of this size, everything is on the table. We were reviewing all options. Implement revenue sharing models with the faculties, definitely something to consider. Looking at administrative bloat is something that we've heard before. There's a question about how many attendees are in the meeting. So the people who are running the meeting are telling me there are 82 people who are attending the meeting today. Coordination and integration around shared services. That's something that's coming out of the budget town halls as well. A number of repeated suggestions that are moving forward, looking at administration, of course, and shared services. Prioritizing students and student faculty ratios. Again, that is, as Roberta said earlier, protecting the core value of teaching, research, and service is a key principle for the budgets overall. Centralizing departmental operating expenses, absolutely. So I'll encourage people to continue to put this in place, continue to keep answering these questions on Menti, and we are collecting all of these components. If we go to the next slide. I just wanted to, before we go to the Q's and A's, just want to talk a little bit about next steps. So we are continuing on with ongoing community consultations. We've scheduled 3 town halls. This is the third of 3. There were 2 virtual and 1 in-person town hall. We will be continuing to have individual and small group consultations through February and into March with groups from across campus, including the labor unions on campus, the student groups on campus, student members of the board. We also talk to all of the budget managers across campus, faculties, divisions, and other units. and of course, Senate. Through this entire process, there is an ongoing conversation with the Board of Governors, leading to a final package to come to the board in April overall. And I'll also note in terms of budget resources, there are two ways that you can continue to find information around the budget. First and foremost is the budget website, which is torontomu.ca/budget. All of the budget information will be there, including one of these two online videos as soon as they can be closed captioned. Today's presentation is posted there as well, along with FAQs. So often we're not able to answer all of your questions in the online section of the presentation. So we do collect all of those up and we provide that information back in FAQs on the budget website. And of course, if you have direct questions, please use the email address budget@torontomu.ca. All of that information, we'll take those questions that come in. We will respond to all the questions. We monitor that email address, and we post all the answers to those questions on the website as well. So with that, I'll turn to the next piece, which we're going to use Mentimeter for questions. So if you're logged on to Mentimeter, please type your questions in there, which should now be available for you. The questions are moderated and promoted up as questions become promoted to the platform. There's a chance to vote on them. And so those questions will come up in rank order. The ones that are voted for most will come up first overall. And I'm going to moderate the Qs and As and direct the questions to Mohammed or Roberta. So the first question is, why isn't the government providing more resources for universities? So I will ask Mohammed to respond to that.
Thank you. For the person who asked this question, why is the government not putting universities as priority? I think we have to ask not only government, but our society, because when we reach out to the provincial government, I hear is the response that you hear often from them. They would always say that voters want us to focus on a number of things. And if you look at those priorities in our society here in Ontario, we know that healthcare is becoming the top priority. Affordability these days, especially with the level of inflation that we have, affordable housing, education to a certain extent, but education not including post-secondary education. And I can tell you that we have a lot of efforts that are undertaken by both each university, but also in the context of the Council of Ontario Universities. We do our best to explain the role of universities in economic development, of course, preparing talent for future of our economy. But I can tell you that in many of the conversation, they would always refer to what the average citizen is asking them to focus on. If I look at the healthcare in particular, the only area that this government has invested in post-secondary, both at the college level and the university level in the last couple of years, is really in programs that are in healthcare. So they have provided extra support for programs like nursing, and this past year, also they increased their support for medical education. They provided extra support for existing medical schools, but we were also a big winner of this support that was provided by the government through the announcement of our medical school. So the government actually provide us at the undergraduate level almost half of the funding provided for medical education, and third at the postgraduate level. So we will continue to the government to understand the role of universities, but we need also to do a better job in society.
Great. Thank you, Mohammed. Next question, please. Can we get more donations from alumni and other community members to generate more revenue? Actually, this is a popular question this year. Maybe I'll ask Mohammed to respond to this one as well.
I think we had this question at every town hall that we had this week. Yes, we work closely with our alumni community, but also with other members of the large community, really to ask for help. But one thing is clear, donations that are coming through alumni or other donors are not necessary to run the university. Most of the donation that we get is really for specific projects. We have been very successful, for example, in providing new opportunities for students for scholarship or award programs, and also donations really to help us with our capital projects and so on. But the vast majority of people will not give money for universities to run programs or to run the general operation of the university.
Great. Thank you so much. We'll go on to the next question. What long-term plans do we have to ensure operational needs such as more permanent positions reflect the projected growth of the university overall? Maybe I'll start and then ask Roberta and Mohammed to add overall. So we did spend some time today looking at the long-term enrollment plan for the university. Not as we mentioned, 90% of all of our revenue is from tuition fees and from operating grants from the province. And so we spend time making sure that those two parts are balanced. So we have a long-term plan that shows the total number of students at the university. There's a projection that is a long-term plan, and we actually project out 2 or 3 years into the overall into the next several years moving forward. So we have an idea that if we follow that enrollment plan, what revenues are going to come in. And we do have detailed costings of what programs cost overall. The budget model does direct, and you'll note from the presentation as well, that teaching costs were one of the key expenditures. So as revenue comes in to the institution, as enrollments go up, there is money that flows directly out to faculties to support the overall costs of those programs overall. So this is quite a complex model that's managed by the university to try to forecast out to ensure that we have those sufficient operating needs. The large challenge today that we saw is really one about inflation. So we're seeing core inflation go up at normal levels given what's happening in the economy. However, the inability to see additional money from operating grants and the inability to increase tuition fees, in particularly for domestic students, means that those revenues are not going up at the same rate that it costs us to supply them. And so we do have a plan. We are monitoring these, but it's the real challenge here is covering inflation. Roberta, Mohammed, is there anything you'd like to add?
Roberta?
I'm good, thank you. I think you answered.
No, I think, Glenn, you covered this very well. It's good to probably move to the next question.
Absolutely. What are the university's plans to reduce administrative bloat? Maybe I'll ask Mohammed to respond.
I mean, the reality is that the top priority remains the core activities of our university, and we know that universities are set to provide the best possible education experience for students. So in terms of budget, the top priorities is always teaching, learning, research, and service. And I can tell you that we'd be happy to discuss the details, and actually our budget process is very transparent. If you want to see non-academic units versus the rest of the academic units, you always see that the lion's share of the budget goes to support academic units.
Absolutely. Toronto is arguably one of the most expensive cities to live in the country. How does TMU plan to maintain increased student enrollments when adequate housing becomes out of reach? Housing is increasingly a concern for all of our students. Maybe I'll ask Roberta to talk about housing and how we support students.
Sure, thank you, Glenn. Actually, just this year, we struck a resident strategy committee that I'm co-chairing in order for us to find solutions to having more spots for our students who want to have affordable living opportunities on campus and around campus. So we are working on that. We're very mindful of that. Because we have, I mean, not only our international students that come to us, but also some domestic students from across the GTA that want to live on campus and be part of the community. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add on that, but we will certainly keep working on those opportunities this year.
Maybe I add just as part of the new plan for the city of Toronto. You have probably seen that this year, for the first time, the city of Toronto put post-secondary institutions as part of the plan for affordable housing. We have started that conversation with the leadership in our city, and we have had meetings with the city manager, also meetings with the mayor. With the transition now, we'll see who will be the next mayor. But we are actually very engaged in those discussions at the City of Toronto level. And also we have been in discussion with the federal level about the possibility of including affordable housing or including universities and colleges in their plan for affordable housing. We hear definitely this is a top priority for students, and we are doing our best to work with partners in the city to provide more housing for students. And of course, we always put a priority for the housing to be affordable for students.
Great. Thank you, Roberta Mohammed. Next question. TMU has one of the highest student faculty ratios of all universities in Ontario. What are you doing to change that? Maybe I'll ask Roberta to begin the response on that as well.
Sure, thank you. This question came up in our in-person town hall as well. And this is actually something that has come up often with our colleagues at the TFA in my previous role. And for sure, I'm not going to get into too many details because I'm sure that we'll be able to talk about that also in bargaining. However, I do want to say a couple of things. So yes, we've heard and we've seen some of the numbers on this. I don't have them in front of me. I'm not sure I agree 100% that we're the highest. But in any case, we will be looking at different things like workload, section size, caps, and what those could look like. But it will need a bit of time. It will need a review of data that we have through our system of teaching assignment integration, et cetera. So while I can't really say, you know, these are some of the things we can look at, you know, we've had changes in faculty workload in the last few years, even before I got here. So all those things are in play when we talk about student faculty ratio. So I think I'll stop there. If my colleagues have anything else to add, go ahead.
Ilan, anything to add on this question?
No, nothing to add from me.
Okay.
Great. So if student enrollment is a critical factor in our financial success, and we're seeing exponential growth in students who are enrolling in AAS, what's the plan to support AAS? Maybe I'll turn to Roberta as well.
So for colleagues who may not know, AAS is Academic Accommodation Services. We've had a lot of conversations around this, and also with respect to Policy 159 with our colleagues at the TFA. So yes, we are looking at a few different strategies around AAS specifically, but related to community health and well-being. We've struck, there's a community-based approach to a committee we've struck. There's a steering committee to try to address through VPFA HR, but the student portfolio where AAS is housed. I know there have been conversations around resources for academic accommodation services, and its multifaceted and the multifaceted area that it is and how it supports students. So between the pandemic and the post-pandemic, we're very aware of, and I saw some of the things in the word cloud of students needing a little more support with their academic life, but also their personal life, their mental health, and their well-being. So we have increased supports to, for example, counseling and counseling services, from what I understand, the use of certain apps and services so that students can have better access to some of these things. The other thing that we're supporting is our plan, and this is something that the students are actually really excited about, is a plan for a student wellbeing center to be built right in the heart of our campus through a holistic, and it'll be a holistic set of services that are offered there, where students will be able to access physical, mental health and well-being programs that enhance obviously we hope will help with their academic success and their overall personal well-being. So this is all related to academic accommodation services, because in my view, and I think our ethos is to look at the student holistically, right? So if their personal well-being is supported, their academic well-being should flourish, right? Should be better. So
great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. I'm paying attention to the time. I'm going to suggest maybe one more question, and then we will wrap up. Is the commitment to present a balanced budget provincially required our own decision? Maybe I'll ask Mohammed to answer that question.
This is an excellent question, and I would say universities are autonomous. So in terms of autonomy, that's an important thing for universities. The role of the government is making sure that each university has a board of governors that is responsible to set those policies. In our case, when we talk about a commitment to a balanced budget, this is a policy that was set by our board of governors many, many years ago. And as I said, the university has presented balanced budget for more than 10 years now. So it was a decision and a policy that was adopted by our board of governors. Now, not all universities have this policy, but if you look at the recommendations that came out of the Auditor General that looked at the situation with Laurentian University, they had two reports, one just for Laurentian University. The other one was to do an audit for 4 different universities. And actually, one of the recommendations is really to tighten the governance and make sure that they ask boards to make sure that repeated deficits can lead to big financial situations. And I can tell you, in the case of Laurentian University, accumulated deficits was also part of the problem. So short answer, this is a decision by each board. And I think it was a good decision by our board to impose on the management of the university to always present a balanced budget. And I hope I answered the question.
Great. Thank you, Mohammed. We're almost out of time. Maybe I'll turn it to Roberta for final questions before Mohammed wraps up.
So thank you very much, Glenn. And I'd like to reiterate my thanks to the community for showing up today and for posing questions and for giving us your feedback. I've been following along on Mentimeter. I think it's important that we continue these consultations. I think, feedback from faculty, staff, and students really helps us through what is an iterative budget process, and in a year that is particularly constrained for us financially. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to Mohammed.
Thank you very much for your participation. This is just one phase of the consultation of our community, and we will continue to reach out to many other groups to set the priorities for our next budget. And I would say, I see the next 2 questions, and I want really very briefly to address them about the transparency in setting the budget. Every detail of our budget is on our website. If you want actually some directions, our finance team can actually sit down with anyone of our community who's interested. So I see a question here. Many universities are transparent in sharing their budget. We do share our budget with our community. So we have a website, and if you need some details, let us know. Also, in terms of the next question, what can we learn from successes and failures from other universities? I can tell you, because of the lack of support from the government, colleges and universities are just pushing for more international students, to the point that a number of colleges in the sector have more international students than domestic students, meaning that more than 50% of students are international in a number of post-secondary education sectors, especially on the college sector. I think we have to be mindful of the danger of also relying just on international students, because we don't get funding from the government. I think we need to work with the government, convince them to invest more in our post-secondary education. With that, thank you so much for your participation, and we'll continue this discussion with the rest of our community. Have a good day.